Chapter 1. The Missing Thing. She missed the feeling of being known, truly known, more than she missed the warmth of another body beside her. That realization came to her on a Sunday morning she had not planned to spend alone, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor of her apartment while the city hummed below. She lay tangled in crisp white sheets, the quiet pressing close, her phone face down on the nightstand like a thing that had disappointed her one too many times. The silence was intimate in a way that felt almost cruel. For a long moment she stayed still, letting the ache bloom fully in her chest. It wasn't loneliness exactly. She had a full calendar, a respected career, dinners with colleagues who admired her discipline and drive. She was, by all measurable standards, doing well. But something was missing. Something warm. Something steady. Something that had once met her every Sunday morning with open doors and familiar hymns. She turned onto her back and stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint crack near the corner she'd never bothered to fix. Church used to be as automatic as breathing. She used to wake up early, choose her outfit carefully, arrive 10 minutes before the service began just so she could sit quietly and let the world slow down around her. Now, Sunday mornings were for emails she told herself couldn't wait, grocery runs, spin classes, or nothing at all. She pressed her palm to her sternum, surprised by the sudden tightness there. "I'm fine," she murmured to the empty room. The words felt thin. By Monday, she had convinced herself the feeling would pass. Feelings always did. She buried herself in work, client calls, strategy decks, numbers that bent obediently to her will. As a senior consultant, she thrived on structure, on solutions that made sense, on problems that could be fixed if you were smart enough and willing to work hard enough. Faith, she had learned, did not operate that way. She'd stopped going to church 2 years earlier, after a season of unanswered prayers and a creeping suspicion that God expected more surrender than she knew how to give. She hadn't left angrily. There was no dramatic falling out, no single offense she could point to, just a gradual drifting, a missed Sunday here, a work deadline there. Eventually, it had been easier not to go at all. That night, after a 12-hour day and a dinner eaten standing at her kitchen counter, she opened her laptop with no clear intention and typed "Solo Ski Trips Utah" into the search bar. The mountains appeared on her screen, white and vast and impossibly clean. Her breath caught. She hadn't skied in years, not since college, but the idea of it stirred something reckless and hopeful inside her. Wide open spaces, cold air, silence that didn't hum with expectation, a place where no one knew her. Within an hour, she had booked a week-long stay near a resort town nestled against the Wasatch Range. She didn't overthink it. Overthinking was how she talked herself out of things she secretly wanted. When the confirmation email arrived, a strange calm settled over her. Maybe this was what she needed. She landed in Utah 3 weeks later under a sky so blue it looked unreal. The drive from the airport wound through valleys and rising foothills, the mountains looming larger with every mile. Snow clung to their peaks, sunlight flashing off the ridges like something alive. She rolled down her window despite the cold, breathing in air that felt sharper, cleaner, as if it carried less weight than the life she'd left behind. Her rental cabin sat just outside town, small but cozy, pine-scented and quiet. After unloading her bags, she stood on the porch for a long moment, taking in the view. The mountains rose before her like sentinels, beautiful, imposing, and utterly indifferent to her presence. It struck her then how small she was. The thought unsettled her and comforted her at the same time. That evening, she made a simple dinner and sat by the fire, scrolling through messages she didn't answer. Her phone buzzed once with a calendar reminder she'd forgotten to disable. Sunday service, 10:30 a.m. She swallowed. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her memory, gentle and familiar. "Wherever you go, God goes with you." She hadn't believed that in a long time. Before bed, she pulled a Bible from her suitcase, a last-minute addition she'd almost left behind. It had belonged to her grandmother, the leather soft and worn, pages thin and whispering when she turned them. She didn't open it right away. just held it, feeling the quiet weight of it in her hands. Finally, she flipped to a page at random. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Her throat tightened. "I don't know how," she whispered, unsure who she was speaking to. Then she closed the book and turned off the light, letting the darkness settle around her like a held breath. The next morning dawned clear and cold. She arrived at the resort early, nerves fluttering low in her stomach as she buckled her boots and slung her skis over her shoulder. The lodge buzzed with energy, families laughing, couples moving in easy sync, friends calling out plans for the day. She felt suddenly very alone. At the lift line, she caught fragments of conversation about trail conditions and weather forecasts. A storm was moving in later that afternoon, someone said. Nothing unusual. Utah weather changed quickly, apparently. She nodded to herself, pretending she knew what she was doing. Her first few runs were cautious but exhilarating. The snow was powdery and forgiving, the air cold enough to sting her lungs. With each descent, she felt something inside her loosen, uncoil. The mountain demanded her full attention. There was no room for rumination, no space for the quiet questions that had followed her for months. By midday, confidence edged into recklessness. She stood at the top of an advanced trail, staring down the slope. The sign warned of variable conditions, but the view was breathtaking, an untouched expanse of white, sunlight glinting off the surface like scattered diamonds. Her heart beat faster. She thought of the verse from the night before. "Come to me, and I will give you rest." A laugh escaped her, soft and incredulous. Rest, it seemed, looked different than she had imagined. She pushed off. The first stretch was glorious, wind rushing past her ears, the rhythm of her body finding a familiar grace she hadn't known she still possessed. She laughed out loud, the sound stolen instantly by the open air. Then the mountain shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a deep, unsettling whump beneath her skis. The snow ahead fractured, a spiderweb of cracks racing outward faster than her mind could process. Time slowed. She tried to turn, to angle herself away, but the ground beneath her gave way. The mountain roared, a sound so vast and violent it seemed to swallow the sky itself. Snow surged forward, dragging her with it, spinning her, blinding her. She screamed once before the world went white. Cold slammed into her chest. Something struck her leg, pain blooming sharp and immediate. She fought, instinct screaming at her to move, to breathe, to do anything but surrender to the weight pressing in from all sides. The snow closed over her head. Darkness followed. Her lungs burned. Panic clawed up her throat as she struggled, movements growing smaller, weaker. The silence was total now, thick and suffocating. She thought of her apartment, of Sunday mornings, of the life she had built so carefully, brick by brick, without leaving room for mystery or mercy. "God," she gasped, not in anger, not in certainty, but in pure, raw need. The word barely left her mouth before the last of her strength gave out. And somewhere above her, the mountains settled into an uneasy stillness. Chapter 2. Buried breath. Cold wrapped around her like a lover who had no intention of letting go. The sensation came first. Not pain, not fear, but pressure. Heavy and intimate, pressing against her chest, her legs, her arms. She tried to inhale and found nothing waiting for her. The air was gone, stolen by the mountain, replaced with a suffocating stillness that felt almost personal. She was dimly aware that she was alive. That knowledge flickered weakly like a candle fighting a draft. Her thoughts arrived in fragments. Snow, dark. Don't panic. Someone had once told her that panic was the fastest way to die in situations like this. She clung to the idea, though she couldn't remember who had said it or why she'd believed them. Her body was pinned at an angle she couldn't correct. One arm was trapped above her head, the other pressed against her ribs. She tried to move her fingers. Nothing happened. A whimper escaped her throat, barely a sound at all. Time ceased to mean anything. Seconds stretched into something elastic and cruel. Her lungs burned, each shallow breath scraping like broken glass. She closed her eyes, not because it helped, but because there was nothing left to see. Her mind reached for anchors, her apartment, the faint smell of coffee that never quite left the air. Sunday mornings spent pretending she didn't miss something sacred. I didn't mean to leave, she thought suddenly, fiercely. The words rose unbidden, unpolished, more instinct than confession. I just didn't know how to stay. Her grandmother's Bible came to her then, the weight of it in her hands the night before, the verse she'd read without meaning to. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. The memory tightened around her heart. Please, she tried to say, but the word barely formed. It existed more as intention than sound. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, instantly freezing against her skin. The cold deepened. Her thoughts began to blur at the edges, the sharpness of fear dulling into something hazy and strange. She wondered, distantly, if this was what surrender felt like. Not the kind preached from pulpits, but the kind that came when there was nothing left to hold on to. Her chest shuddered once, then everything went quiet. Sound returned slowly. At first it was distant, vibrations rather than noise, a rhythmic thumping, muted and irregular. She thought of helicopters, though the idea felt abstract, like remembering a dream. The sensation grew stronger, closer, sending tremors through the snow that encased her. Light flickered. Her eyes fluttered open as something scraped above her, a sharp contrast to the suffocating stillness she'd known. Snow shifted, loosened, and a rush of cold air spilled down over her face. She gasped, the breath tearing into her lungs like fire. "There you go!" a voice said, low and steady. "Easy, easy." The sound of it grounded her instantly. Male, calm, unhurried in a way that felt deliberate, practiced. A voice that had learned how to sound like hope even when hope was fragile. Hands appeared in her field of vision, gloved, efficient, careful. A face followed, partially obscured by goggles and a helmet dusted with snow. She couldn't see his eyes, but she felt their focus, unwavering and intent. "You're safe," he said, closer now. "I've got you." She wanted to believe him. The words slid into her chest, warming something that had gone dangerously cold. Her voice cracked, raw and hoarse. Panic threatened to surge, clawing back to life now that air had returned. "Hey!" One gloved hand settled against her shoulder, firm but gentle. "Stay with me. You're doing great." The contact startled her, not because it was rough, but because it was so sure, so anchoring. She clung to the sensation, letting it pull her back from the edge of whatever darkness she'd been slipping toward. "What's your name?" he asked. She blinked, the question feeling strangely intimate. She swallowed. Her throat seized again. "That's okay," he said quickly. "We'll come back to that. Just keep breathing for me." She obeyed, focusing on the rise and fall of her chest. Each breath hurt, but it was pain she welcomed, proof that she was still here, still fighting. He worked methodically, clearing snow from around her, checking her limbs with careful precision. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, as if he'd done this 100 times before. "How long?" she managed. "Long enough," he replied. "But we found you in time." The word brought a flicker of relief. She wasn't alone. She hadn't been forgotten. Her gaze drifted to his mouth as he spoke, the way his breath fogged faintly in the cold air. The proximity was intense, closer than she'd been to anyone in months. She could feel the heat radiating from him despite the layers between them. "Can you feel your toes?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Good. That's very good." He smiled then, just a brief curve of his mouth, but it did something unexpected to her. Something dangerous. Her pulse quickened, not from fear this time, but from the sudden awareness of him, of the way his presence filled the small pocket of space carved out around her. "Focus," she told herself weakly. "You're buried in a mountain." He adjusted something near her face, A mask, she realized dimly, guiding oxygen toward her mouth. His fingers brushed her cheek in the process, bare skin against cold skin. The contact lingered for half a second too long. Her breath hitched. His eyes met hers for the first time, visible now behind the goggles as he lifted them slightly. They were warm brown, steady and searching, holding hers with a concentration that felt almost reverent. "Stay with me," he said again, quieter now. "You're not alone." Something inside her cracked open at that. They moved her slowly, carefully. The world tilted as she was freed from the snow, the weight lifting in increments until she could breathe fully again. Pain flared in her leg, sharp and immediate, and she cried out despite herself. "I know," he murmured. "I know. We're almost there." She clutched at his sleeve, fingers tightening instinctively around the thick fabric. He didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned closer, bracing her with his body as they worked. "Don't let go," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I won't," he said without hesitation. The certainty in his voice steadied her more than the oxygen, more than the careful hands of the other rescuers who now crowded into her awareness. She let herself rest against him as they secured her, trusting him with a vulnerability she hadn't offered anyone in a very long time. As they lifted her onto the sled, her vision swam. Exhaustion pressed down on her again, heavy and insistent. She fought it, afraid of slipping back into the dark. "Hey," he said softly, his face close again. "Look at me." She did. "You're going to be okay," he said. "I need you to stay awake just a little longer." She nodded weakly. "You promise?" The question surprised them both. For a moment, something flickered across his face, something deeper than professional calm. Grief, maybe, or understanding. He covered it quickly, but she saw it. "I promise," he said. Her eyes drifted closed anyway, her strength ebbing despite her best efforts. As consciousness faded, one final thought surfaced, clear and startling in its intensity. This isn't just survival. Somehow, impossibly, she knew that whatever had found her beneath the snow was more than chance. And as the sled began to move, carrying her away from the mountain that had nearly claimed her, the last thing she felt was the steady pressure of his hand against hers, unwavering, warm and real. She woke to darkness again. But this time it wasn't empty. Somewhere nearby, she heard his voice, low, focused, speaking her name. And for the first time since the avalanche, fear gave way to something else entirely. Hope. Chapter 3. The weight of being held. The first thing she noticed was the warmth and the unsettling awareness that it didn't belong to her. It surrounded her, steady and deliberate, pressing close in a way that felt intimate before she fully understood why. Her cheek rested against something firm, her body supported at an angle that suggested arms, strong ones, wrapped around her with practiced care. She inhaled sharply. "Easy," a familiar voice murmured near her ear. "You're safe." Her eyes fluttered open, vision blurry and unfocused. Light spilled in from somewhere above, too bright, too clean. She blinked again, grounding herself in sensation. The ache in her leg, the stiffness in her shoulders, the unmistakable awareness of a man holding her upright as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Heat rushed to her face. Her throat tightened, embarrassment colliding with lingering fear. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," he said, calm and unruffled. "You passed out for a second. Happens more than you'd think." She swallowed, acutely aware of the way his arm was braced behind her back, his other hand steady at her side. Not gripping, not hesitant, just there, solid, reliable, too intimate. "Sorry," she whispered anyway. He smiled, not the quick, reassuring curve she remembered from the mountain, but something softer, something almost amused. Nothing to apologize for. She let out a slow breath and eased back as he helped her settle onto the stretcher. The space between them felt suddenly too wide, the absence of his warmth registering like a loss she wasn't prepared to name. Around them, the rescue scene buzzed with controlled urgency. Snowmobiles idled nearby. Voices called out coordinates, vitals, next steps. She felt strangely removed from it all, as if she were watching from behind glass. He stayed close. "You're headed to the hospital," he said, meeting her gaze again. "Looks like a fractured tibia. Could be worse." She huffed weakly. "That's comforting." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'm serious. You did everything right." "I triggered an avalanche," she said. "And you survived it," he countered gently. "That matters." Something about the way he said it, the quiet certainty, the lack of judgment, settled deep in her chest. They loaded her into the ambulance, the doors closing with a final echoing thud that made her pulse spike. The space inside was tight, sterile, humming with motion. He climbed in beside her without hesitation, securing straps, checking monitors, moving with the ease of someone who knew exactly where to place his hands. Each touch was professional, necessary. Still, her breath caught every time. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly, the question tumbling out before she could second-guess it. He paused, glancing up at her with something like surprise. "Ethan," he said. "And yours?" She told him. He repeated it once, quietly, as if testing the sound of it. The way he said her name, careful, unhurried, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. The ambulance lurched forward, siren wailing to life. She flinched, instinctively reaching out. Her fingers brushed his sleeve. He stilled. For half a second, neither of them moved. Then his hand closed gently around hers, grounding and warm. "I've got you," he said, eyes steady on her face. She nodded, trusting the words more than she understood. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and coffee. They wheeled her through corridors that blurred together, the adrenaline finally draining from her system and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Ethan stayed with her through intake, through questions she answered automatically, through x-rays and the dull throb of pain that flared whenever her leg was moved. When the nurse finally ushered him aside, she felt the separation keenly. "You'll be okay here," he said, lingering by the door. "I'll check back once things settle." "You don't have to," she replied, though the thought of him leaving tightened something in her chest. "I know," he said simply. "I want to." The words echoed long after he was gone. Alone in the quiet of the room, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the day in fragments. The mountain, the darkness, his voice breaking through the silence like a lifeline. She thought of the verse she'd remembered beneath the snow. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned." Isaiah 43:2. The words settled over her like a balm, unfamiliar and achingly familiar all at once. Had God been with her? The question frightened her more than the avalanche had. Ethan returned an hour later, hair damp from melted snow, jacket traded for hospital scrubs. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, studying her with quiet focus. "Doctor says you're lucky," he said. "Clean break. Surgery tonight, then recovery." "Lucky," she repeated, wry. He smiled faintly. "I've seen unlucky." Something passed between them then, an understanding she couldn't quite articulate. He wasn't just speaking as a rescuer. He was speaking as someone who knew what it meant to stand on the edge of loss and look down. "Why do you do this?" she asked before she could stop herself. He tilted his head. "Do what?" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely. "The rescues. The risk." He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more guarded. "Because people need help," he said. "And because once you've been helped yourself, it's hard to ignore that call." She studied him, wondering what story lay beneath the words. Grief hovered there, just beneath the surface, restrained but undeniable. "I used to believe everything happened for a reason," she admitted softly. "Now I'm not so sure." Ethan nodded as if he understood. "Faith doesn't always give you answers," he said. Sometimes it just gives you something to hold on to when the answers don't come. Her heart skipped, the words striking closer to home than she was ready for. "Do you believe that?" she asked. "I do," he said without hesitation. Their eyes held, the space between them charged and quiet. The moment felt dangerously intimate, too much for strangers bound only by circumstance and shared trauma. A nurse knocked, breaking the spell. As preparations for surgery began, Ethan stepped back, giving her space. Before he left, he hesitated, then reached out, brushing his thumb lightly over the back of her hand. "I'll be here when you wake up," he said. The promise lingered as anesthesia pulled her under. She surfaced slowly, drifting up through layers of fog and sensation. Pain throbbed dully in her leg, but it was manageable, distant. What anchored her was the sight of him, sitting in the chair beside her bed, head bowed, hands clasped loosely in his lap. He looked different, less guarded, more human. She watched him for a long moment before realizing what he was doing. He was praying. The intimacy of it stole her breath. He didn't notice her watching until she shifted, his head lifting abruptly. Relief softened his features when he saw her eyes open. "Hey," he said quietly. "Welcome back." "How long?" she murmured. "A couple hours," he replied. "Everything went well." She nodded, emotions swelling unexpectedly in her chest. "I saw you." A faint flush crept up his neck. "Saw me?" "Praying," she said. He hesitated, then shrugged lightly. "Habit." "It was nice," she said, unsure why the words mattered so much. He smiled, small and sincere. "I'm glad." Silence stretched between them, comfortable and charged all at once. She wondered if he felt it too, the pull, the sense that something fragile and significant was unfolding between them. "I should let you rest," he said eventually, standing. "But I'll be back tomorrow." She nodded, disappointment flickering despite herself. As he reached the door, she spoke again, the words tumbling out on instinct. "Ethan." He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for finding me." Something in his expression shifted, softened, deepened. "Grace found you," he said quietly. "I just followed the trail." The words echoed long after he left, settling into her heart with unexpected weight. Later that night, long after the lights dimmed and the hospital grew quiet, she stared out the window at the dark silhouette of the mountains beyond the city lights. She should have been asleep. Instead, questions pressed close. About faith, about survival, about the man who had held her beneath the weight of the mountain and stayed. And as the storm clouds gathered again in the distance, unseen but inevitable, she sensed, deep in her bones, that whatever had begun in the snow was far from over. Some rescues, she realized, did not end at the hospital doors. Chapter 4. Stillness. The intimacy of being watched while she slept unsettled her more than the pain. She sensed it before she saw him, the quiet awareness of presence, of attention focused wholly on her. Her eyelids fluttered open slowly, the world coming into focus in muted hospital light. And there he was. Ethan sat in the chair beside her bed, posture relaxed but alert. One ankle crossed over his knee, hands loosely clasped as if he'd been there long enough for vigilance to soften into something more personal. His gaze met hers instantly. "Morning," he said quietly, as though raising his voice might fracture the moment. Her throat felt dry. "How long have you been—" "Long enough," he replied, the hint of a smile touching his mouth. "You were sleeping pretty hard." Embarrassment warmed her cheeks. She shifted beneath the blankets, acutely aware of the thin hospital gown, of how exposed she felt in more ways than one. "I hope I didn't—" "You didn't," he said gently, standing. "You needed rest." The way he said it, certain, protective, made something inside her loosen. She exhaled slowly, letting her head sink back into the pillow as he stepped closer, close enough now that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of fatigue that suggested he hadn't slept much either. "How's the leg?" he asked. "Sore," she admitted, "but manageable." "Good," he said. "Pain reminds you you're alive." She huffed softly. "You're full of encouragement." He smiled then, and it did something dangerous to her composure. It wasn't flirtatious, not overtly, but it held warmth and restraint in equal measure, a balance she found herself leaning toward instinctively. The nurse interrupted, efficient and cheerful, checking vitals and adjusting medication. Ethan stepped back without being asked, giving her space while never fully disengaging. She noticed the way his eyes tracked every movement, the way his attention returned to her the moment the nurse left. "So," he said, hands slipping into his pockets, "they're keeping you here another day or two. Physical therapy starts tomorrow." "That sounds painful." "It is," he said without apology, "but it works." She studied him, struck again by the steadiness he carried. He didn't soften truths for comfort. He didn't dramatize them either. He simply stood in the middle of things as they were. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "Rescue?" he said. "About 12 years. EMT longer than that." "That's a long time." He nodded. "Long enough to learn what matters." She wanted to ask what that was, but something in his expression warned her away. Instead, she asked, "And you just stay with people like you did with me?" "Not always," he admitted, "but sometimes." "Why me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet for a moment, gaze drifting to the window, to the pale winter light beyond. When he looked back at her, his eyes were thoughtful. "Because you were afraid," he said simply, "and because no one should be alone when they think they might die." The words struck her with surprising force. She swallowed. "I was. I know." Something shifted between them then, an unspoken acknowledgement, a shared understanding forged beneath the weight of snow and silence. She felt it in the way her pulse quickened, in the way her awareness sharpened around him. She looked away first. The day passed slowly, measured in meals she barely touched and nurses who came and went. Ethan left briefly to check in at work but returned by afternoon, bringing with him a quiet energy that filled the room. He brought her coffee, black, exactly the way she liked it, though she couldn't remember telling him that. When she asked, he shrugged. "Educated guess," he said. "You don't strike me as a cream and sugar person." She laughed, surprised by the sound. "You'd be right." They talked then, about inconsequential things at first. The town, the mountains, the way winter changed the rhythm of life there. Conversation flowed easily, comfortably, as if they weren't strangers bound by extraordinary circumstances. Eventually, the talk slowed. She found herself studying his hands, strong, capable, marked faintly with scars she suspected came from years of work done without hesitation. She imagined those hands steadying her again, holding her with the same quiet assurance they had on the mountain. The thought sent warmth curling low in her belly. She shifted again, unsettled by her own body's response. "Are you uncomfortable?" he asked, immediately attentive. "No," she said quickly, then softer, "just thinking." He smiled faintly. "Dangerous pastime." She met his gaze, something bold rising in her chest. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You already have," he replied. "But go ahead." Her heart thudded. "You said once you'd been helped, that it was why you do this." His expression changed, subtly but unmistakably. The warmth receded, replaced by something guarded. "Yes," he said. "By who?" she asked gently. Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. He didn't look away this time. Instead, he took a breath, slow and measured. "My wife," he said, "and God." The words landed softly, devastating in their simplicity. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it with her whole heart. "Don't be," he replied. "It's just part of the story." She hesitated. "What happened?" He considered her for a long moment, as if weighing trust against caution. Finally, he spoke. "She got sick," he said. Fast, aggressive. By the time we knew what we were dealing with, it was already a lot. Her chest tightened. "I prayed," he continued, voice steady but low. "I begged. I believed God would heal her." "And," she prompted quietly. "And he didn't," Ethan said. The words hung in the air, stark and unadorned. She waited, afraid to interrupt. "But he stayed," Ethan added after a beat. "He stayed when I sat in hospital rooms that smelled like antiseptic and fear. He stayed when I buried her. He stayed when I didn't know how to keep breathing without her." Her eyes burned. "That's when I learned," he said, meeting her gaze again, "that faith isn't a bargain. It's a presence." Something in her cracked open at that. "I don't know if I believe that anymore," she confessed. "That's okay," he said gently. "Belief isn't a switch. It's more like learning to stand again after you've been knocked down." She thought of the avalanche, of the weight, of the stillness. "Do you ever wish you'd stopped believing?" she asked. He shook his head without hesitation. "No, even when it hurts." She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his conviction. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Psalm 23:4. The verse surfaced unbidden, familiar and newly fragile all at once. "I used to love that psalm," she said quietly. He smiled, something like relief flickering across his face. "Me too." That evening, after visitors dwindled and the hospital settled into its nighttime hush, Ethan lingered by her bed. The lights were dimmed, the space intimate in a way that made her acutely aware of every breath, every shift of fabric, every inch between them. "You should go home," she said, though she didn't want him to. "I will," he replied. "Soon." He didn't move. The silence stretched, charged, and uncertain. She felt the pull then, stronger than before. Not just toward him, but toward the steadiness he represented. Toward the way he made the world feel momentarily safe again. "Ethan," she said softly. "Yes." "What happens after this?" she asked. "When I leave? When the mountain fades?" He studied her, something searching in his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't think this was just an accident." Her breath caught. Neither of them spoke. The space between them seemed to narrow on its own, drawn by something neither had named aloud. He reached out, stopping just short of touching her cheek, his hand hovering as if waiting for permission he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask for. Her pulse thundered. She leaned into the space instinctively, heart racing, breath shallow. His fingers brushed her skin, light, reverent, and the contact sent a shock through her that stole the air from her lungs. For a moment, it felt like the world narrowed to that single point of connection. Then footsteps sounded in the hallway. Ethan pulled back instantly, composure snapping into place as if nothing had happened. The moment fractured, leaving behind an ache that settled deep in her chest. "I should go," he said quietly. She nodded, disappointment sharp and unexpected. At the door, he paused, turning back to her. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said. It wasn't a question. She watched him leave, the echo of his presence lingering long after the door closed. Alone in the quiet, she pressed her hand to the spot on her cheek where his fingers had brushed her skin. The warmth lingered, undeniable. This was dangerous. Not because of him, but because of what he awakened. And as she lay there, heart racing, faith stirring uncomfortably to life alongside desire, she realized with startling clarity that the hardest part of her recovery was still ahead. Because some things, once felt, could not be unfelt. Chapter 5. The Invitation. Desire crept in quietly, disguising itself as gratitude. She noticed it first in the way her body reacted before her mind could intervene. The subtle lift of her pulse when she heard Ethan's voice in the hallway, the warmth that bloomed low and slow when he stepped into the room, carrying that steady calm with him like a second skin. It unsettled her. How quickly her awareness of him had sharpened into something intimate. Dangerously intimate. He arrived mid-morning, jacket slung over one shoulder, the faint scent of cold air clinging to him as if he'd brought the mountains inside. His gaze found her immediately, softening when he saw she was awake. "How are we feeling today?" he asked. She smiled despite herself. "Like I lost a fight with gravity." He chuckled quietly, setting the jacket aside and moving closer. "That checks out." Physical therapy was brutal in its honesty. Every movement demanded more than she wanted to give, every step a reminder that healing was neither quick nor tidy. Ethan stayed, offering encouragement without hovering, his presence a grounding force when frustration threatened to overwhelm her. "You're doing better than yesterday," he said as she settled back into bed, breathless and flushed. "That's a low bar," she replied. "Still counts." Their banter felt easy now, natural, too natural. She wondered when he had slipped so comfortably into her thoughts, into the empty spaces she hadn't known how to fill before. Later, when the hospital quieted again, he pulled a chair closer, sitting at her bedside with an ease that made her chest tighten. "They're talking about releasing you tomorrow," he said, "as long as you've got somewhere accessible to stay." She hesitated. "My cabin's not exactly designed for crutches." "I figured," he said. "There's a guest suite at my place. Ground floor. You'd be welcome to use it until you're steady again." The offer hung between them, charged and unmistakable, her breath caught. "That's incredibly kind, but I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't be," he said simply, "and I'd rather know you're safe." Safe. The word landed differently now. It carried weight, intimacy, possibility. "I'll think about it," she said, careful. He nodded, not pushing. "That's all I ask." The next day unfolded in a blur of paperwork and careful movements. When Ethan helped her into the passenger seat of his truck, his hand lingered at her waist just long enough to make her heart stutter. She noticed. So did he. The drive was quiet, the landscape unfolding beyond the windshield in white and gray, the mountains standing watch. She felt suspended between gratitude and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. His home was modest and warm, filled with light and quiet order. A few framed photos lined the hallway. She avoided looking too closely, afraid of what or who she might see. He settled her into the guest suite with gentle efficiency, explaining where everything was, then lingering in the doorway as if reluctant to leave. "If you need anything," he said, "I'm right upstairs." "I know," she replied softly. That night, lying in a bed that wasn't hers, she stared at the ceiling and tried to still the restless ache beneath her ribs. She thought of how easily he'd offered help, of how natural it felt to accept it. Be careful, she warned herself. Sunday arrived quietly. She knew the day by the way the light filtered through the window, softer somehow, slower. Her phone buzzed with a calendar alert she hadn't disabled. Sunday service. She swallowed. Ethan knocked gently a few minutes later. "You up?" "Yes." He stepped inside, hands tucked into the pockets of his sweater. "I was going to head to church," he said, voice casual. "No pressure, but you're welcome to come if you'd like." There it was. The invitation she hadn't known she was bracing for. She stared at him, heart racing. Church had always been the dividing line, the place where things became real, where questions demanded answers. The thought of returning, especially with him, made her chest tighten with fear and longing in equal measure. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to be." She searched his face for expectation and found none, just openness, space. "Why do you go?" she asked quietly. He considered her for a moment. "Because it reminds me I'm not carrying everything alone." The truth of it struck her harder than she expected. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. The verse surfaced unbidden, unsettling in its familiarity. "I'll come," she said suddenly, the words escaping before fear could intervene. If that's okay." A slow smile spread across his face. "It is." She stood at the church doors 10 minutes later, heart pounding as if she were about to cross a threshold she might not be able to retreat from. Ethan waited beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm through the fabric of his coat. "You can leave any time," he murmured. "No explanations required." She nodded, grateful beyond words. Inside, the sanctuary was simple. Wood and light. Quiet murmurs. Familiar hymns drifting softly through the space. The scent of coffee and polished pews wrapped around her, tugging at memories she hadn't realized were still tender. She sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap, every nerve alive. The sermon was gentle, centered on restoration, not as a destination, but as a process. The words slipped past her defenses, settling somewhere deep and raw. She felt it then, the ache, the longing, the sense of coming home to something she'd left unfinished. Her eyes burned. Ethan didn't look at her, didn't draw attention to her tears. His hand rested on the pew between them, close enough to be felt but not claimed. The restraint made her chest ache. When the service ended, she lingered, reluctant to break the fragile stillness that had settled over her heart. "How are you?" he asked quietly as they stepped outside. "I don't know," she admitted, "but thank you for asking me." "Any time," he said. The afternoon passed in easy conversation, shared meals, quiet moments that deepened the pull between them. As evening fell, the house grew still, the air thick with unspoken awareness. They stood in the kitchen, close enough now that the tension between them felt electric. "I should go upstairs," he said softly. "Yes," she agreed. Neither moved. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then lifted again, restraint written into every line of his posture. "This is where I stop," he said quietly. "Before we cross a line we can't uncross." Her breath shuddered. She nodded, grateful and aching all at once. As he turned away, something in her chest clenched, not with disappointment, but with respect, with trust. Later, alone in bed, she pressed her hand to her heart, feeling it race beneath her palm. Faith and desire tangled together, indistinguishable now. And as sleep finally claimed her, one thought echoed louder than the rest. This was only the beginning. Chapter 6. When Morning Comes. She woke with his name on her lips and no memory of dreaming it there. The realization startled her enough that she lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house waking around her. Morning light spilled softly through the window, brushing the walls in gold. For a fleeting moment, peace settled over her, warm and intimate, like a secret she hadn't yet decided whether to keep. Then memory returned. The church, the way the music had wrapped around her chest, Ethan's restraint in the kitchen, the honesty of it, the way he'd stepped back even when everything in the air between them had leaned forward. Her body responded before her mind did, heat blooming low and slow, the ache unmistakable. She exhaled sharply, pressing her palm to her stomach. "This is dangerous," she told herself again, not because desire was wrong, but because it was awakening alongside something deeper, something holy, something she wasn't sure she was ready to tend without breaking it. She swung her legs carefully off the bed, wincing as her injured leg protested and reached for her crutches. Each movement reminded her that she was still recovering, not just physically, but in ways far harder to measure. Downstairs, the smell of coffee greeted her. Ethan stood at the counter, sleeves rolled to his forearms, hair still damp from the shower. He looked domestic in a way that made her chest tighten, comfortable, grounded, entirely real. He glanced up when he heard her approach, concern flickering across his face. "How's the leg?" he asked. "Stiff," she admitted, "but manageable." "Good," he said, setting a mug on the counter before moving toward her. His hand hovered at her elbow, a silent offer of help. She hesitated, then nodded. The contact was brief, careful, but it sent a ripple through her she couldn't ignore. He seemed to feel it too, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly before he released her. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the space between them intimate despite the distance. Conversation came easily at first, small, safe topics that skirted around the weight of the night before. Eventually, the silence deepened. "I'm glad you came yesterday," Ethan said quietly. "So am I," she replied, surprising herself with how true it felt. He studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether to say more. "Church can be a lot," he added, "especially if you've been away." She nodded. "It felt like walking into a room where everyone knew a version of me I'm not sure still exists." "That version might still be there," he said gently, waiting. The words settled into her chest, stirring both hope and fear. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Psalm 51:10. The verse rose unbidden, fragile and demanding all at once. She wrapped her hands around her mug, grounding herself in the warmth. "What if I don't know how to come back?" she asked softly. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Then you come back slowly." Their eyes held, the space between them charged with more than attraction now. This was about faith, about vulnerability, about the dangerous territory where desire and devotion brushed too close together to pretend they were separate. "I should give you space," he said after a beat, "to heal, to think." Her heart stuttered. "Is that what you want?" "It's what's right," he said quietly, "for both of us." She nodded, even as disappointment flared sharp and unexpected. He wasn't pulling away because he didn't feel it. He was pulling away because he did. The realization only made it harder. The days that followed settled into a careful rhythm: physical therapy in the mornings, quiet afternoons spent reading, thinking, praying in fits and starts. Ethan came and went with respectful distance, never absent, never intrusive. He checked in, made meals, offered help, but he no longer lingered in doorways or let silence stretch into something dangerous. The restraint was its own kind of intimacy. She found herself missing him even when he was only a room away. One afternoon, while he was out, she opened her grandmother's Bible again. The pages fell easily now beneath her fingers, as if they remembered her touch. "Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you." James 4:8. Tears blurred the words. "I'm trying," she whispered to the empty room. "I just don't know what I'm doing." That evening, Ethan returned later than usual. His jacket was dusted with snow, his expression thoughtful and tired. "You okay?" she asked, surprised by how easily concern slipped into her voice. "Yeah," he said, though it sounded like an answer he gave out of habit. He set his keys down and leaned against the counter, rubbing the back of his neck. "Long day?" "Something like that." She waited, sensing there was more. Finally, he spoke. "I got a call today," he said, "from the station." Her stomach tightened. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated. "They want me back full time, earlier than expected." The words landed heavy. "Oh," she said softly. "It's a good thing," he added quickly. "I think. It's what I do." "When?" she asked. "Soon," he said. "A week. Maybe less." Her heart sank, disappointment blooming sharp and undeniable. She forced herself to nod. Of course. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. "I don't want you to think—" He stopped, searching for words. "This isn't me running away." "I know," she said, though part of her wanted to protest, wanted him to stay. "This is just timing," he finished, "and timing matters." She swallowed. "It always does." That night, sleep eluded her. Questions pressed close, relentless, about faith, about love, about whether the two could coexist without one becoming a substitute for the other. She rose quietly and made her way to the living room, settling onto the couch with a blanket. The house was dark, still. Minutes later, Ethan appeared in the doorway, concern etched across his features. "Couldn't sleep." She shook her head. "Too much noise in my head." He hesitated, then crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. He sat on the opposite end of the couch, posture tense, as if afraid of crossing another invisible line. "You're quiet," he said. "So are you." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Occupational hazard. The silence deepened, intimate and fragile. She could feel him beside her, his warmth, his presence, close enough to ache. "I'm afraid," she admitted suddenly. "Of what?" "Of confusing you for God," she said, the words trembling as they left her mouth. "Of letting how you make me feel replace what I'm supposed to be finding in him." The honesty hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them again, his gaze was gentle. "That's a wise fear," he said quietly, "and it's one I share." She turned toward him then, heart racing. "What do we do?" He met her gaze, something resolute settling over his features. "We step back," he said. "Not away, just back. We let God be God." The words hurt, even as they felt right. He stood, offering a hand to help her rise. She took it, the contact brief but electric. At the doorway to her room, he paused. "I care about you," he said softly. "More than I probably should right now." Her breath caught. "Me too." For a moment, it felt like the world held its breath with them. His gaze dropped to her mouth again, restraint carved into every line of his posture. His hand tightened once around hers, then he let go. "Good night," he said. "Good night." She closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. This wasn't the kind of love story she'd imagined growing up. It didn't rush. It didn't take. It waited. And that scared her more than the avalanche ever had, because waiting required trust. And trust, real trust, meant surrender. As she slid beneath the covers, one final thought echoed through her mind, sharp and unavoidable. If God was asking her to choose him first, what would that mean for Ethan? And would she be brave enough to find out? Chapter 7. The Space Between. Longing had a sound, she decided. It was the quiet that followed his absence. The house felt different the morning Ethan left early for a shift, the air thinner somehow, as if the walls had moved a fraction farther apart. She noticed it in the echo of her crutches against the floor, in the way the coffee tasted flatter without his steady presence across the table. She told herself this was good, necessary. Still, her body betrayed her long before her faith caught up. She caught herself listening for his truck in the driveway, for the low timbre of his voice moving through the house. Each time the sound didn't come, disappointment settled deeper into her chest. She hated how easily she had grown accustomed to him. Physical therapy pushed harder now, each session demanding patience she didn't always possess. The therapist praised her progress, but the effort left her drained, emotionally as much as physically. Healing, it seemed, required more stillness than she was used to. Stillness was dangerous territory. Left alone with her thoughts, questions surfaced relentlessly, about God, about Ethan, about whether choosing distance was an act of faith or fear disguised as obedience. That afternoon, she wheeled herself onto the back porch, blanket tucked around her legs, the mountains rising pale and watchful in the distance. They looked different now, less threatening, more solemn, witnesses rather than adversaries. She opened her Bible, the worn pages falling open easily. "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. The verse felt like a command and a comfort all at once. "I don't know how," she whispered, "not without reaching for something else." She closed her eyes, letting the silence stretch. For the first time in a long while, she didn't rush to fill it. Ethan returned that evening quieter than usual. Snow clung to the hem of his jacket, his shoulders tense beneath the fabric. He greeted her warmly enough, asking about therapy, about pain levels, about practical things, but something sat heavy behind his eyes. "You're tired," she said gently as they stood in the kitchen. He nodded. It was a long call. She hesitated, then asked, Bad? He exhaled slowly. A family, car accident, kids in the back seat. Her chest tightened. Did they? They're alive, he said, but shaken, bruised, scared. She stepped closer without thinking, stopping just short of touching him. I'm glad you were there. His gaze dropped to the floor, then lifted to hers. For a moment, the distance he'd been maintaining wavered. So am I, he said quietly. They ate dinner in careful conversation, circling around heavier truths neither seemed ready to name. When dishes were done, Ethan leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her with a thoughtfulness that made her pulse quicken. You've been quiet today, he said. So have you. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Fair. Silence settled, charged and fragile, the kind that demanded honesty or retreat. Ethan, she said softly, heart pounding, are we doing the right thing? He closed his eyes briefly as if bracing himself. I believe so. That's not the same as knowing, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. She studied him, the restraint etched into every line of his posture. What if distance isn't what God wants? She asked. What if we're mistaking fear for wisdom? He met her gaze, something intense flickering there. And what if closeness becomes a crutch? He countered gently. What if it keeps you from asking the harder questions? The truth of it landed like a blow. She swallowed. I hate that you might be right. He smiled faintly. Me too. They stood there, close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the faint scent of cold and soap clinging to his skin. Her body leaned toward him instinctively, desire flaring bright and insistent. He noticed. His jaw tightened, breath hitching almost imperceptibly. For a moment it looked like he might reach for her anyway, logic and resolve faltering beneath something far more human. Instead, he stepped back. The restraint hurt worse than rejection. I should head upstairs, he said quietly. Yes, she replied, though every part of her wanted to ask him to stay. That night she lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, replaying the moment over and over. Not the distance, but the choice, the discipline it required, the cost. Faith, she was learning, was rarely comfortable. 2 days later, she walked unassisted for the first time. The victory felt fragile but significant, like stepping onto uncertain ground after a storm. Ethan watched from the doorway, pride softening his features. You're doing it, he said. So are you, she replied, surprising them both. He chuckled quietly. Not sure it feels like it. That afternoon, she received an email from work, a reminder of everything waiting back home, deadlines, expectations, the version of herself that had never needed stillness to survive. The thought made her chest ache. That evening, she found Ethan in the living room, packing his gear bag. The sight sent a sharp pang through her. You're leaving again? She asked. Overnight shift, he said. I should be back tomorrow afternoon. She nodded, forcing herself to smile. Be safe. He hesitated, then crossed the room, stopping in front of her. Close enough now that the tension between them felt almost unbearable. You're doing well, he said quietly. With the therapy. With everything. Because of you, she replied honestly. He shook his head. Because of God. She inhaled sharply, emotions swelling. I don't know how to separate the two yet. That's okay, he said. You don't have to rush. He reached out then, not to touch her, but to adjust the blanket draped over the back of the chair behind her. The near contact made her breath catch. Ethan, she whispered. He stilled. Yes? If you asked me to come with you when I leave, she said, voice trembling. I don't think I'd be strong enough to say no. The admission hung between them, raw and dangerous. Ethan's expression shifted, pain and longing warring openly now. He stepped back, putting space between them deliberately. That's why I won't ask, he said softly. Not yet. Her heart pounded. Not yet? Not until you know you'd choose faith even without me, he continued. And not until I know I'm choosing you for the right reasons, too. Tears stung her eyes. She nodded even as the words carved something deep and aching into her chest. I understand, she said. He shouldered his bag, pausing at the door. I'll see you tomorrow. She watched him leave, the click of the door echoing through the house like punctuation. That night, alone again, she returned to the porch, the mountains dark and silent under the stars. She breathed in the cold air, steadying herself. Okay, she whispered into the stillness. It's just you and me. The words felt terrifying and honest. She opened her Bible once more, letting the pages fall where they would. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. Her breath shuddered. Stillness, trust, waiting. She closed her eyes, the ache of longing pressing close, and prayed. Not for answers, not for relief, but for courage. Because loving Ethan was easy. Choosing God first? That was the real mountain. And as she sat there, heart raw and open beneath the stars, one truth settled inescapably into her bones. If she couldn't learn to stand alone in her faith, she would never be able to walk beside him. The thought terrified her, and it was exactly where God seemed to be leading her. Chapter 8. The Leaving Place. Desire didn't fade with distance, it sharpened. She felt it most in the moments when she almost reached for him and remembered she wasn't supposed to. In the space where his presence used to steady her, longing took root instead, slow and insistent. It lived in the quiet hours, in the pauses between breaths, in the way her body still leaned toward where he had been. Healing had given her strength back. Distance was teaching her something else entirely. Her leg improved quickly now, the therapist nodding in approval as she walked the length of the room without assistance. Each step felt like a victory and a warning. The stronger she became, the closer she came to leaving this place, leaving the house, leaving the mountains, leaving Ethan. The thought settled uneasily in her chest. That afternoon, she packed a little. Nothing final, just a drawer, a bag. The act felt symbolic, like testing the idea of departure without committing to it. When Ethan came home early, she was folding a sweater, her movements careful and deliberate. His gaze caught on the suitcase by the bed. Oh, he said softly. Her hands stilled. I'm not leaving yet. I just thought I'd start. He nodded slowly, the faintest flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Makes sense. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. How was work? She asked. Hard, he admitted, but good. She smiled faintly. That seems to be your standard answer. He smiled back, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Occupational hazard. They stood there, neither moving closer nor stepping away, the space between them alive with restraint. She felt the pull of him as keenly as ever, maybe more so now that leaving loomed. Ethan, she said quietly, can we talk? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. They moved to the living room, sitting at opposite ends of the couch like people pretending distance didn't hurt. The mountains beyond the window were washed in late afternoon light, their edges softened by snow and shadow. I got an email from work, she began. They want me back next week. His chest rose with a measured breath. That soon? Yes. Silence pressed in again. I don't want to leave like this, she continued, fingers twisting in her lap. Unsaid things, unfinished things. He looked at her then, really looked, his gaze searching, open, unguarded. Neither do I. Her heart pounded. Then why does it feel like we're bracing for it? Because sometimes the right thing still hurts, he said quietly. The truth of it made her throat tighten. She looked away, blinking hard. I'm afraid that when I go back, everything that started here will disappear. It won't, he said immediately. You don't know that. I know this, he replied. What's real doesn't vanish just because circumstances change. she swallowed. And what if what's real isn't meant to last? The question hovered between them, raw and dangerous. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. When my wife was sick, he said, I thought the hardest part would be losing her. Her breath caught. But it wasn't, he continued. It was realizing I couldn't control the outcome, that loving her didn't give me leverage with God. She listened, heart aching. I'm afraid, he admitted, that if I reach for you too tightly right now, I'll be trying to control something again, and I don't want to do that. To you or to God. The honesty stripped something bare in her. I don't want to be a test, she whispered. You're not, he said gently. You're a gift. That's exactly why I want to hold this carefully. Tears slipped free before she could stop them. She brushed them away impatiently. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Psalm 27:14. The verse echoed in her mind like both a promise and a command. I don't know how to wait, she said softly. Ethan shifted closer, not touching but close enough that she felt the warmth of him, the nearness that made restraint a conscious act. Then let waiting be an act of faith, he said. Not punishment, not denial, just trust. She turned toward him, pulse racing. And what if waiting costs us everything? His gaze dropped to her mouth before lifting again. The hunger there startled her, not uncontrolled but deeply felt. Then God will still be good, he said quietly, even if it breaks our hearts. The words landed heavy and final. The days that followed felt like borrowed time. They moved through them carefully, aware of each other in every room, every silence. Their conversations were tender, deliberate. Laughter came easier now, perhaps because both knew it was temporary. On her last day of therapy, she walked without assistance. Ethan clapped softly, pride bright in his eyes. You did it, he said. So did you, she replied. He frowned slightly. I didn't. Yes, you did, she insisted. You stayed, even when staying meant not taking. Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, longing, something dangerously close to surrender. That night, the house settled early. Snow fell quietly outside, the world hushed beneath it. She found him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring out the window. I leave in 2 days, she said. I know. She stepped closer, heart hammering. I don't want to regret how we end this. His breath hitched. Neither do I! The air between them tightened, the moment stretching thin. She lifted her hand slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. Her fingers brushed his sleeve, then his forearm, feeling the tension there. His hand rose, hovering at her waist without quite touching. This is where we stop, he said, voice rough. If we keep going. I know, she whispered. Their foreheads touched, the contact reverent and restrained. Her breath mingled with his, close enough to steal air, close enough to ache. For the record, he murmured, this is the hardest thing I've done in a long time. She smiled through tears. Me too. They stayed like that for one impossible moment, pressed close, hearts racing, everything unsaid humming between them. Then footsteps sounded upstairs, hers as she forced herself to move away. She turned at the doorway, heart breaking and full all at once. When I leave, she said, don't disappear. I won't, he promised, and you won't either. That night, alone in bed, she stared at the ceiling and prayed, not for certainty, but for endurance. Teach me to trust you, she whispered, even when it costs. Her Bible lay open beside her, pages rustling softly as if alive. Those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. Psalm 126:5. She pressed her hand to her chest, letting the ache exist without trying to fix it. 2 days. 2 days until she left the mountains behind. 2 days until she found out whether faith could survive without proximity, and whether love could endure obedience. And somewhere downstairs, Ethan lay awake too, staring into the same darkness, asking the same unspoken question. Was letting go the only way to truly hold on? Chapter 9. After the leaving. Desire followed her onto the plane like a second shadow. It sat close in the narrow seat, pressed against her ribs with every shallow breath, whispering reminders of what she had chosen not to take with her. She closed her eyes as the engines roared to life, the vibration rattling through her bones, and let the ache have its say. This was what obedience felt like. Not clean or triumphant, not brave in the way stories like to make it. It felt like loss, sharp, quiet, and deeply personal. She hadn't cried when she left Ethan's house, not when he loaded her bag into the trunk, not when he hugged her, careful, restrained, his arms solid and warm around her for the briefest moment before he let go. "I'll call," he'd said. "I know," she'd replied. They hadn't kissed. That had been the point. Now, thousands of feet in the air, she pressed her forehead against the window and watched the mountains fall away beneath the clouds. The Wasatch Range faded into white and gray, beautiful and distant, until it disappeared entirely. She swallowed hard. "Okay," she whispered. "It's just you and me now." Home felt louder than she remembered. The city buzzed with motion, sirens, traffic, voices bleeding through thin apartment walls. Her life resumed as if nothing had happened. Emails piled up. Meetings filled her calendar. Colleagues welcomed her back with practiced smiles and polite concern. No one asked about faith, or avalanches, or the way her heart still leaned west. On Sunday morning, she stood in her kitchen staring at the clock, heart pounding. The urge to sleep in tugged at her insistently. So did the temptation to text Ethan, to ask him what he was doing, whether church had started yet. She didn't. Instead, she grabbed her coat and walked out the door. The church near her apartment was smaller than the one in Utah, less familiar. She slipped into a back pew, pulse racing, and bowed her head as the music began. "Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth." Psalm 86:11. The verse echoed softly in her mind, steadying her. She sang quietly, letting the words wash over her without demanding anything in return. Tears gathered, uninvited but welcome. This time there was no one beside her, no steady presence to anchor her emotions. Just God. And that had to be enough. Ethan called that evening. His name lit up her phone, her heart leaping before she could stop it. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said, trying to sound normal. "Hey," he replied. The sound of his voice settled something restless inside her. "You made it back, okay?" "Yes, smooth flight." "Good." A pause followed, comfortable but heavy with everything they weren't saying. "How's the leg?" he asked. "Strong," she replied. "I walked a mile today." He chuckled softly. "Knew you would." She smiled, picturing him on the other end, probably leaning against a counter, brow furrowed in that familiar way. The image tightened her chest. "And you?" she asked. "How's work?" "Busy," he said, "but manageable." They talked for a while, circling around safe topics, careful not to step too close to the edge. When the silence returned, it felt louder now, magnified by distance. "I went to church today," she said quietly. He inhaled sharply. "You did?" "Yes." I'm really glad," he said. The sincerity in his voice warmed her. "So was I," she admitted. Another pause. "I missed you," she added, the words tumbling out before caution could intervene. His breath caught audibly. "I miss you too." The admission hovered between them, electric and restrained. "Ethan," she said softly, heart racing, "are we doing this right?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "I don't know if there's a right," he said. "Just obedience and hope." Hope. The word felt fragile in her hands. "I'm trying," she said. "So am I." They said goodnight not long after, neither willing to push the moment further. When the call ended, she sat in the quiet of her apartment, phone still warm in her hand. Distance hadn't erased him. It had clarified him. Days passed. She fell into rhythm again. Work, therapy exercises, evenings spent reading scripture and praying in halting, honest phrases. Some nights she felt strong, grounded in her choice. Other nights, loneliness pressed close, sharp and demanding. She learned to sit with both. One evening, she opened her grandmother's Bible and found a pressed flower tucked between the pages, something she must have placed there years ago. The sight of it stole her breath. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord, "plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Jeremiah 29:11. She closed her eyes, letting the promise settle. "Even if it's not the future I imagine," she whispered, "especially then." The call came a week later. She was in the middle of a late dinner when her phone rang. Ethan's name flashed across the screen again, but this time something in her chest tightened with foreboding. "Ethan?" she answered. "Hey," he said, voice strained. "I'm sorry, it's late." "It's okay," she replied, already standing. "I had a call today," he continued. "A big one." Her heart thudded. "Are you all right?" "I am," he said, "but it shook me." She waited, breath shallow. "It was a rescue," he said. "Avalanche. 2 hikers. We only found one." The words landed like a blow. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed. He exhaled shakily. Standing there, digging through the snow. It brought everything back. You, that day, the wait, the silence. Her chest ached. "I'm so sorry." "I prayed," he said quietly. "Right there. Asked God why he saves some and not others." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "And?" she asked. "And I didn't get an answer," he said. "But I felt him with me anyway." She pressed her hand to her mouth, emotion swelling. "That's faith," she whispered. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's just trust." Silence stretched, heavy and sacred. "I needed to hear your voice," he admitted. Her heart pounded. "I'm glad you called." "So am I." The pause that followed felt different, less restrained, more urgent. "There's something else," he said. Her pulse spiked. "Okay." "I've been offered a position," he continued. "Full-time, permanent. It's here." Here, Utah. Her breath caught. "I don't know what to do," he said. "I don't know how to hold everything without reaching for control again." She closed her eyes, steadying herself. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to choose God," he said finally, "even if that means letting go of what I want most." The words mirrored her own prayer so closely it stole her breath. "And what if choosing God doesn't mean losing each other?" she asked softly. "That's what scares me," he admitted. Her heart hammered, hope and fear colliding. "Ethan," she said, voice trembling, "I'm not ready to decide anything, but I know this. I don't want fear to be the loudest voice anymore." He exhaled, something like relief coloring the sound. "Neither do I." They hung up soon after, both unsettled, both hopeful. That night she lay awake long after the city quieted, staring at the ceiling. Utah felt far away. So did certainty. She rose quietly and knelt beside her bed, hands clasped, heart bare. "Show me the next step," she whispered. "Just one." Her Bible lay open beside her, the page illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp. "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." Psalm 119, verse 105. A lamp, not a floodlight. She smiled faintly through tears. The path ahead was still obscured, still uncertain. But somewhere beneath the ache and longing, faith steadied her. And as she lay back down, one truth settled deep and undeniable. Letting go hadn't ended the story. It had only brought them to the hardest part. Because choosing God first didn't mean choosing alone. And whatever came next, distance, reunion, or something she hadn't yet imagined, she was finally willing to walk forward in trust. Even if the light only reached as far as her next step. Chapter 10. The Cost of Staying. Desire didn't ask permission, it simply returned, quieter now, but more dangerous for its patience. She felt it in the way Ethan's voice lingered after phone calls ended, in the echo of his words as she moved through her days. Distance hadn't cooled the ache. It had refined it, stripping it down to something bare and insistent. What remained wasn't just longing for him. It was longing for what he represented. Steadiness, faith tested by fire, a life ordered around something larger than comfort. And that terrified her. Work demanded her attention again, relentless and familiar. Meetings bled into evenings, deadlines pressed close. The rhythm of productivity welcomed her back like an old friend who never asked too many questions. But something had changed. She noticed it the first time she bowed her head before a meeting. Not long, not conspicuous, just a moment of quiet asking, for clarity, for restraint, for courage. Faith was no longer something she visited. It followed her. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, she stood at her kitchen counter staring at her phone. Ethan had texted earlier, "Call when you can, nothing urgent, just him." She waited until the city settled into its nighttime hush before dialing. "Hey," he answered, warmth threading the word. "Hey." Silence stretched between them, familiar and charged. "I've been thinking," he said finally. Her pulse quickened. "About?" "Us," he admitted. "And God. And whether those two things can stop feeling like they're competing." She closed her eyes. "I've been thinking the same thing." "I don't want to make you choose," he said quietly. "That's not fair. And it's not faith." "I know," she replied. "But sometimes choosing God feels like choosing loss." "Yeah," he said softly. "It does." They sat with the truth of that, neither rushing to soften it. "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." Matthew 10:37-39. The verse surfaced unbidden, uncomfortable and sharp. "I don't like that verse," she confessed. Ethan chuckled softly. "Most people don't." "But I think I'm starting to understand it," she continued. "It's not about losing love. It's about not letting love become an idol." His breath caught. "That's exactly it." The silence that followed felt different, less restrained, more resolved. "I got offered a promotion today," she said suddenly. His tone shifted. "Congratulations." "Thank you," she replied. "It would mean more responsibility, longer hours, travel." "That sounds like you." "It does," she said. "The old me." He didn't respond immediately. "And?" he prompted gently. "And I don't know if that life leaves room for what I'm becoming," she admitted. "For church, for stillness, for us." The words felt dangerous and freeing all at once. "I don't want you to shrink your life for me," Ethan said. "I don't want to expand it in the wrong direction either," she replied. Another pause. "What are you afraid of?" he asked. She swallowed. "That if I say no to the promotion, I'll resent it. And if I say yes, I'll lose something I can't get back." "That sounds like faith," he said quietly. She laughed softly, the sound edged with nerves. "I was afraid you'd say that." Weeks passed. Her church began to feel familiar now. The faces, the rhythm of worship, the quiet strength of showing up even when doubt lingered. She joined a small group reluctantly, then gratefully, surprised by how grounding it felt to speak faith aloud without polish. One night after the group ended, she lingered in the parking lot, phone in hand. "Can we talk?" Ethan texted. She called immediately. "I made a decision," he said without preamble. Her heart pounded. "Okay." "I turned down the permanent position." The words hit her like a rush of cold air. "Ethan." "I know," he interrupted gently. "I know how it sounds. But I didn't do it for you." She exhaled slowly, emotion surging. "Then why?" "Because staying felt like hiding," he said, "like choosing safety over calling. And I promised myself after my wife died that I wouldn't live smaller out of fear." Tears burned her eyes. "So what now?" she asked. So now, he replied, I go where I'm needed, and I trust God with the rest. The conviction in his voice steadied something inside her. I'm proud of you, she said. So am I, he replied, and I'm proud of you too, for building a faith that doesn't lean on me. The words landed with bittersweet tenderness. The call came 3 days later. She was at work when her phone buzzed, Ethan's name flashing across the screen again. She stepped into an empty conference room, heart racing. What's wrong? She asked immediately. There's been an accident, he said, voice tight. Another avalanche. Her breath caught. Ethan, are you… I'm fine, he said quickly. But they're asking for volunteers. It's risky. The conditions are unstable. Fear flared sharp and immediate. And you're going? Yes. Her knees weakened. She sank into a chair, gripping the edge of the table. Please be careful. I will, he promised, but I needed to call you first. Why? She whispered. Because if something happens, he said slowly, I don't want the last thing between us to be distance. Her heart thundered. Ethan. I'm not asking for anything, he continued. I just needed you to know that what we've been doing, choosing God first, it hasn't lessened how I feel. It's deepened it. Tears spilled freely now. I feel it too, she admitted. Every day. Silence stretched, heavy and sacred. Pray for me, he said quietly. I will, she replied without hesitation. They ended the call soon after, both holding back more than they said. That night, she knelt beside her bed, hands clasped so tightly her fingers ached. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to love without clinging. Her Bible lay open, pages turned by instinct rather than intention. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. She exhaled shakily, letting the truth sink in. Not control, not certainty. Trust. Hours passed without sleep. She checked her phone obsessively, every vibration sending her heart racing. Midnight came and went. Still no word. Just after dawn, her phone rang. She answered breathlessly. Ethan? I'm okay, he said immediately. Relief crashed over her so hard she nearly sobbed. Thank God. Yeah, he agreed softly. Thank God. They didn't talk long. He was exhausted, heading home, but before hanging up, he said, There's something I need to ask you. Her heart skipped. Okay. When this is over, he continued, when the distance and the fear stop dictating the terms, would you consider coming back here? Her breath caught. To Utah? Yes, he said. Not to rescue you, not to replace your faith, but to walk beside me, if God leads you here. The question hung between them, terrifying and holy. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm willing to ask God. That's all I hoped for, he replied. They hung up, leaving her alone in the quiet glow of early morning. She stood at the window, watching the city wake, heart pounding with possibility and fear. Faith had asked much of her already, but this was everything. And as the sun rose, one truth settled heavy and unavoidable in her chest. If God asked her to move, not away from Ethan, but toward a calling she hadn't planned, would she have the courage to follow? Chapter 11. The Asking. The thought of leaving settled into her body before it ever reached her mind. It showed up in the way her chest tightened when she walked past her favorite coffee shop, in how familiar streets suddenly felt provisional, as if they belonged to a version of her life she was already outgrowing. Desire threaded through it too, quiet but persistent, braided now with something deeper than longing. Calling. That word frightened her more than love ever had. She stood at her apartment window long after midnight, city lights stretching endlessly below, and tried to imagine a future that included none of this. No skyline, no corner office, no carefully curated life that had once made her feel invincible. Her phone lay on the table behind her, silent but heavy with implication. Would you consider coming back here If God leads you? Ethan hadn't asked her to promise anything. He hadn't asked her to choose him. He'd asked her to listen, to God first, and that made all the difference. The next morning, she met with her pastor. She hadn't planned it that way. The appointment had come together almost accidentally, a quiet conversation after service that turned into an invitation for coffee. Now she sat across from him in a small office that smelled faintly of old books and fresh tea, hands wrapped tightly around her mug. "I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something," she said finally, "and I don't know if stepping forward is faith or recklessness." He smiled gently. "Those two are often mistaken for one another." She exhaled. "I've built my life on certainty, on plans. This feels unwise." "Does it?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "It feels costly." He nodded. "Faith usually is." Silence stretched, inviting honesty she hadn't rehearsed. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of uprooting everything. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of letting love become the loudest voice again." "And what voice do you want to be loudest?" he asked. She swallowed. "God's." He leaned back, studying her thoughtfully. "Then ask yourself this," he said. "If Ethan weren't part of the equation at all, if God were asking you the same thing without him, what would you say?" The question lodged deep, unsettling and clarifying all at once. She didn't answer right away. That night she knelt beside her bed again, hands resting loosely in her lap. The posture felt more natural now, less desperate, more deliberate. "I don't want to run," she whispered, "and I don't want to hide behind wisdom that's really just fear." Her Bible lay open in front of her, the page worn thin with familiarity. "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach." James 1:5. She closed her eyes. "Show me," she prayed simply, "and make me brave enough to listen." Clarity did not arrive like lightning. It came like dawn, slow, gradual, unmistakable only in hindsight. She noticed it in the way her chest loosened when she imagined leaving. Not Ethan, but the life she'd outgrown. In the way prayer no longer felt like negotiation, but alignment. In how the idea of Utah, of mountains and service and a life oriented around presence instead of achievement, no longer felt like escape. It felt like obedience. The promotion offer sat unanswered in her inbox. She read it again, fingers hovering over the trackpad, heart steady in a way that surprised her. She closed the email. Then she typed a response. Ethan answered on the first ring. "Hey," he said, warmth flooding the word. Her breath caught immediately. "Hi." "Are you okay?" he asked. "You sound resolved," she said softly. Silence bloomed on the other end of the line, charged and attentive. "I talked to my pastor today," she continued, "and I've been praying. A lot." "I'm listening," he said quietly. She swallowed. "You asked me to consider coming back to Utah, if God leads me." "Yes, I think he is," she said. The words hung between them, fragile and holy. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked, his voice careful, not cautious, but reverent. "I'm sure enough to obey," she replied. "Not because of you, not for safety, but because staying here feels like clinging." He exhaled slowly, something like awe threading through the sound. "I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll let me keep choosing God even when it's hard," she said. "Say you won't make me the answer to prayers you're meant to carry to him." His voice roughened. "I promise." Her heart swelled, desire flaring bright and deep, not reckless now, but rooted. "When?" he asked. "Soon," she said. "I have things to untangle, but I'm coming." The silence that followed pulsed with possibility. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. She smiled through tears. "I'm terrified." "That usually means you're paying attention," he replied softly. They hung up not long after, both aware that something irrevocable had shifted. The final week passed in a blur. She gave notice at work, the words tasting strange but right in her mouth. She packed boxes with quiet resolve, touching objects that no longer defined her. Friends reacted with confusion, concern, thinly veiled envy. "You're doing what?" one asked. She smiled gently. "Listening." Church on Sunday felt different, less like refuge, more like sending. The hymns wrapped around her with familiar warmth, but there was motion beneath them now, forward momentum. "The Lord will guide you continually." Isaiah 58:11. She wrote the verse on a slip of paper and tucked it into her wallet, just in case she forgot. Utah greeted her with cold air and wide sky. Ethan waited just beyond the security gates, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but eyes alert, as if she might disappear if he blinked too long. When he saw her, everything else fell away. He didn't rush toward her, didn't close the distance immediately. He just smiled, slow and unguarded, and she felt it all the way down to her bones. "Hi," he said. "Hi." They stood there for a moment, taking each other in as if recalibrating. New context, new gravity. "You look settled," he said. "So do you." They walked outside together, the cold biting and clean. He took her suitcase, fingers brushing hers briefly in the exchange. The contact sent a quiet shiver through her, not urgent, not consuming, anticipatory. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "So am I," she replied. At his house, the familiarity of the space felt different now, less temporary, more intentional. She moved through it with new eyes, aware of the way faith had reordered her sense of belonging. That evening, as they stood on the porch watching the mountains darken beneath the stars, the pull between them surfaced again, steady and undeniable. Ethan turned toward her, expression intent. "We should talk about boundaries," he said. She smiled softly. "I was hoping you'd say that." He laughed quietly. "Romantic, I know." "No," she said, stepping closer. "It is." They stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath, the air thick with restraint and desire. His hand lifted, hovering near her waist, waiting. "This doesn't end the waiting," he said. "It changes it." She nodded. "I know." His fingers brushed her side then, light, reverent, sending warmth through her without urgency. "This time," he murmured, "we're waiting together." Her heart raced, desire and peace colliding beautifully, and for the first time, she didn't feel torn. Later that night, alone in the guest room, she knelt beside the bed one last time before sleep. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not rushing me, for not letting me settle." Her Bible lay open, pages thin and luminous in the lamplight. "The steps of a man are established by the Lord when he delights in his way." Psalm 37:23. She smiled softly. The step she'd taken had cost her certainty, but it had given her something far greater: direction. As she slid beneath the covers, heart full and unsettled in the best possible way, one truth settled deep and undeniable. She had chosen obedience. Now she would discover what kind of love could grow from that soil. Chapter 12. The Shape of Waiting. Desire felt different now, less like hunger, more like gravity. It drew her toward him in quiet, inevitable ways, the pull of his presence across a room, the way her body oriented itself toward him without conscious thought. This wasn't the restless ache she'd known before, sharp and demanding. This was steadier, deeper, almost reverent. That frightened her more than the wanting ever had. Living in the same place again, by choice this time, reshaped everything. Morning light filtered through the house softly, familiar yet newly significant. Shared routines emerged carefully, deliberately. Coffee brewed in companionable silence. Scripture read separately but discussed later tentatively, as if neither wanted to handle the sacred thing too roughly. They were close, closer than before, and still waiting. The discipline of it pressed in unexpected ways. One afternoon she found Ethan in the garage, sorting rescue gear with methodical focus. The sight of him, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in concentration, stirred something warm and dangerous low in her stomach. She leaned against the door frame, watching him for a moment longer than necessary. "You're staring," he said without looking up. She smiled. "Am I not allowed?" He glanced up then, eyes darkening slightly. "Depends on your intentions." Her breath hitched, heat flaring bright and unmistakable. "Complicated," she admitted. He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a towel. The air between them tightened, thick with awareness. "Complicated is becoming a theme," he said quietly. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The space felt suddenly intimate, enclosed. She could smell him, soap, cold air, something uniquely him. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "if waiting changes what we're waiting for?" His gaze held hers, intent and searching. "I think it changes us," he said, "and that changes everything else." The truth of it settled between them, tender and unsettling. But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Romans 8:25. The verse surfaced unbidden, both comfort and challenge. She exhaled slowly. "I'm not very patient." He smiled faintly. "I've noticed." She laughed softly, the sound easing some of the tension. But it returned quickly, more focused now, less playful. "I'm afraid," she admitted. His expression softened immediately. "Of what?" "Of doing this right, and still getting hurt." He nodded, as if he'd been expecting the answer. "Faith doesn't promise protection from pain," he said gently. "Just purpose in it." Her chest tightened. "And love." "That too," he said, "if it's real." That evening they attended church together for the first time since her return. Not as rescuer and rescued, not as long-distance hope, but as two people choosing to stand side by side without leaning too hard. The service was simple, the music familiar. She felt grounded in a way that surprised her, not swept away by emotion, but anchored. During the sermon, the pastor spoke about stewardship, of gifts, of time, of love, about holding blessings with open hands rather than clenched fists. She felt Ethan's presence beside her, steady and warm, and understood the message with aching clarity. Afterward, they lingered outside beneath the fading sky, people passing around them in easy conversation. Snow drifted lightly, the air sharp and clean. "You okay?" Ethan asked. "Yes," she said, "just taking it in." He nodded. "Me too." They walked home in companionable silence, shoulders brushing occasionally, each contact sending a quiet shiver through her. The restraint no longer felt like deprivation. It felt intentional, honoring. At the porch, Ethan paused, turning toward her. "We should talk," he said. Her heart skipped. "About what?" "About what comes next," he replied. The words landed heavy. They went inside, settling on opposite ends of the couch, distance chosen, not imposed. The familiar ache stirred, but it was tempered now by trust. "I don't want to rush this," Ethan said, "and I don't want fear to slow us either." She nodded. "I feel caught between those two things most days." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I need to know something," he said quietly, not for reassurance, but for clarity. "Okay. If God asked you to walk away from this, from me, would you still obey?" The question pierced straight through her defenses. She swallowed, heart pounding. Images flashed through her mind, his smile, his steadiness, the life they might build. The thought of leaving it all behind hurt in a way that felt almost physical. But the answer came anyway. "Yes," she said softly. "I would." The words trembled, but they held. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, something like relief crossing his face. When he looked at her again, his gaze was brighter, clearer. "Then I can love you freely," he said, "not as my answer, not as my anchor, but as a gift." Tears slipped free, unbidden. "And if God asks you to let me go?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Then I will." The honesty of it hurt and healed. They sat there for a long moment, letting the truth breathe between them. Later that night, the house quieted, shadows stretching long across the floor. She found herself restless, pacing the length of the living room, heart humming with unspent emotion. Ethan appeared in the doorway, watching her with concern. "You okay?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I feel full and unsettled." He smiled softly. "That sounds about right." She laughed weakly, then grew serious again. "Can I ask you something selfish?" He nodded. "Try me." "Can you hold me?" she asked quietly. "Just hold me." The request hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Ethan's breath deepened. He crossed the room slowly, stopping an arm's length away. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said, "and if it's too much—" "It's not," he interrupted softly, "but we need to be clear." "I know," she whispered. "Nothing more." He hesitated only a moment longer before stepping into her space, wrapping his arms around her carefully. The contact sent warmth flooding through her, grounding and electric all at once. She rested her cheek against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. His hands settled at her upper back, firm, respectful, present. The intimacy stole her breath. "This is harder than I thought," he murmured. She smiled against him. "Waiting?" "Letting myself feel," he replied. She tightened her arms around him slightly, then still, aware of how close they were to crossing a line neither wanted to blur. "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering." Hebrews 10:23. She breathed the verse silently, anchoring herself. They stayed like that for a long moment, neither moving, neither rushing. When he finally eased back, his eyes were dark, intent, full of restraint. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me with that." She nodded, heart racing. "Thank you for honoring it." The call came the next morning. Ethan answered it in the kitchen, voice shifting as he listened. She watched his expression change, focus sharpening, tension settling into his shoulders. When he hung up, he turned toward her slowly. "There's been another avalanche," he said. "Bigger than the last one, multiple people missing." Her stomach dropped. "You're going." "Yes." Fear surged, but beneath it something steadier took hold. "I'll pray," she said immediately. He crossed the room, stopping in front of her, hands hovering at her waist without touching. "I need you to know," he said quietly, "that going doesn't mean I'm choosing danger over you." "I know," she replied. "It means you're choosing obedience." He nodded. "And trusting God with what I can't control." She swallowed. "Come back safe." He smiled faintly. "That's the plan." At the door he paused, turning back. "Whatever happens," he said, "I'm grateful we're doing this right." Her heart pounded. "Me too." He left, the door closing softly behind him. She stood there long after, hands pressed to her chest, breath shallow. Waiting had shape now. It looked like prayer, like trust, like loving without possession. And as she knelt beside the couch, heart bare once more, a single truth echoed loud and clear. Waiting wasn't the absence of love, it was the proof of it. Chapter 13, The Storm. Waiting stripped desire down to its bones. It wasn't longing anymore, not the aching pull she'd come to recognize in the quiet moments. This was sharper, cleaner. Fear honed by love, love steadied by faith. As the hours stretched on, she realized that what she wanted most was no longer relief, but trust. That realization frightened her almost as much as the waiting itself. The house was too quiet. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall, the soft creak of the floor beneath her pacing steps. She checked her phone again, knowing there would be nothing new, and set it face down on the table as if distance might make the silence easier to bear. It didn't. She moved to the window, staring out at the mountains swallowed by gray. Snow fell steadily now, thick and relentless, erasing edges and blurring distance. Somewhere out there, Ethan was moving toward danger, not because he was reckless, but because he was called. She pressed her hand to the glass. "Please," she whispered, not a plea for safety alone, a surrender. Please be with him. She hadn't realized how far her faith had come until this moment, until fear rose and she didn't reach for control, didn't bargain, didn't rehearse outcomes she could not influence. She reached for God instead. Kneeling beside the couch, she bowed her head, hands open on her knees. "I won't try to hold what isn't mine," she prayed quietly. "I won't ask you to trade obedience for comfort." The words felt costly and honest. Her Bible lay open on the coffee table, pages turned earlier without intention. She lifted her eyes to it now, breath catching as the verse met her gaze. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." Psalm 46, verse 1. A refuge, not an escape, a place to stand when the storm did not relent. She exhaled slowly, letting the truth settle into her bones. The call came after midnight. Her phone buzzed once, then again. She snatched it up, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Ethan?" she answered, voice unsteady. "It's me," he said. His voice was hoarse, strained, but alive. Relief crashed through her so violently she had to sit down. "Oh, thank God." He exhaled shakily. "Yeah, thank God." She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "Are you hurt?" "No," he said. "Cold, exhausted, but okay." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Tell me what happened." "It was worse than we thought," he admitted. "The slide shifted while we were digging. We had to pull back." Her chest tightened. "Did everyone make it out?" "No," he said quietly. The word landed heavy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "So am I," he replied. Silence followed, thick, reverent. "But we found 2 alive, barely." Hope threaded through the grief. "You did what you could," she said softly. "That's the part I'm learning to trust," he replied. "That obedience isn't measured by outcomes." Her throat tightened. "I was praying." "I know," he said, voice gentling. "I felt it." The intimacy of the admission stole her breath. "I'm heading home now," he continued. I wanted to hear your voice before I did." "Come home," she said. "Please." "I will." They ended the call not long after, neither willing to stretch the moment too thin. She sat there long after, phone still warm in her hand, the storm outside easing into a softer, quieter fall. Waiting had not broken her. It had refined her. Ethan arrived just before dawn. She heard the truck first, tires crunching against snow, the low hum of the engine cutting through the quiet. Her heart leapt, her body moving before thought could catch up. She opened the door as he stepped onto the porch, snow clinging to his jacket, his face lined with exhaustion and relief. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he crossed the threshold and she was in his arms. The contact was immediate and overwhelming. She pressed her face into his chest, breathing him in. Cold air, wool, something unmistakably him. His arms wrapped around her, firm and protective, holding her as if letting go were not an option. She laughed once, breathless and wet with tears. "You're here." "I am," he murmured, his voice rough against her hair. "I've got you." The words landed differently now, no longer rescue but promise. They stayed like that longer than either had planned, the world narrowing to the warmth between them. When he finally eased back, his hands remained at her upper arms, steady and present. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I was afraid, but not undone." His gaze searched hers, something like awe flickering there. "That's faith." She smiled faintly. "I think so." They moved inside, shedding coats and boots in companionable silence. The house felt warmer now, fuller, as if it had been holding its breath too. Ethan sank onto the couch with a weary sigh, elbows braced on his knees. She sat beside him, close but careful, aware of how charged the space still was. "I don't want to pretend tonight didn't change something," he said quietly. Her heart thudded. "Neither do I." "I saw things out there," he continued. "Fragility, mercy, the way life hangs by threads we don't control." He looked up at her, eyes intent. "And all I could think about was whether I was holding what mattered most the right way." She swallowed. And I realized," he said slowly, "that loving you doesn't pull me away from God. It pushes me toward Him." Her breath caught. "But only because we've refused to make each other the center," he added. "Only because we've waited." Tears filled her eyes again, this time unashamed. "I don't want to do this halfway," she said. "Not faith, not love." He nodded. "Neither do I." They sat there, the quiet humming between them. Not empty now, but full. "Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins." 1 Peter 4:8. The verse surfaced in her mind, not as permission but as calling. She turned toward him fully then, heart racing. "Ethan," she said softly, "I choose you." His breath hitched. "Not instead of God," she continued quickly, "but with Him, under Him. I choose the life this points toward." He reached for her hand, fingers interlacing with hers, deliberate, reverent. "Then I choose you the same way," he said, "not as my refuge, but as my partner." The intimacy of the words settled deep, steadying rather than overwhelming. Slowly, intentionally, he leaned forward. She met him halfway, breath mingling, foreheads touching. The closeness was electric, desire humming bright and undeniable. "This is where I ask," he murmured, lips a whisper from hers. "Are we still waiting?" She smiled, heart full and steady. "Yes." Relief and longing crossed his face in equal measure. He brushed his thumb over her knuckles, grounding himself. "Then this," he said softly, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, "is enough." The tenderness of it undid her more than anything else could have. Later, as the sun crept over the mountains, washing the snow in pale gold, she stood at the window once more, this time with Ethan beside her. The storm had passed. The peaks stood clear and quiet, etched against the sky like witnesses. She leaned into his side, feeling the solid warmth of him there, not clinging, not afraid, just present. "This place used to scare me," she said quietly. "The mountains?" he asked. "No," she replied. "Surrender." He smiled faintly. "They look less dangerous now." "They do," she agreed. As they stood there, wrapped in early light and hard-won peace, one truth settled clear and unshakable in her heart. The storm had not taken him. The waiting had not broken them. And whatever came next, joy or grief, certainty or unknown, they were finally ready to meet it without fear. Because grace had found them, and it had taught them how to stay. Chapter 14. The Way Home. Love, she discovered, did not arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, in the way his hand found hers without hesitation, in the shared breath they took before stepping forward into a life neither could fully see yet trusted anyway. Desire still lived there, warm, steady, unmistakable, but it no longer demanded proof. It rested, content to be held rather than satisfied. That somehow felt holier than anything she had imagined love could be. Morning broke gently over the mountains, sunlight spilling across snow-dusted peaks like benediction. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of life resuming, coffee brewing, boots drying by the door, the ordinary rhythm of two people learning how to share space without losing themselves. She stood at the counter, fingers wrapped around a warm mug, watching Ethan move through the kitchen with an ease that felt earned. He glanced up, meeting her gaze, something like wonder still flickering there, as if he hadn't yet adjusted to the reality of her standing in his life by choice. "You okay?" he asked. She smiled softly. "I think so." "Just think," he teased. She shrugged lightly. "It's a lot of peace to get used to." He nodded. "Yeah, it takes practice." They laughed quietly, the sound settling easily between them. Later, bundled in coats, they stepped outside together. The storm's aftermath had transformed the landscape, everything pristine, hushed, reverent. The mountains rose before them, no longer threatening, no longer something to conquer, just present. They walked slowly, her steps steady now, their shoulders brushing occasionally. Each contact sparked warmth, but no urgency. The restraint that had once felt heavy now felt like trust. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after a while. She glanced at him. "Dangerous words." He smiled faintly. "About what comes next. Not in specifics, but in posture." She considered that. "And? I don't want to rush into building a future without first tending the foundation," he said. "Faith, community, rhythm." Her chest warmed. "That sounds like wisdom." "I'm hoping it is," he replied, "but I wanted to say it out loud." She stopped walking, turning fully toward him. "I don't want a love that outruns God anymore," she said quietly. "I want one that walks with him, even when it's slower than I'd like." Ethan reached for her hand, fingers closing gently around hers. Then were aligned. "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain." Psalm 127, verse 1. The verse surfaced easily now, not sharp, not demanding, just true. They stood there a moment longer, letting the mountains witness what they had chosen. Church felt different now, not new, not overwhelming, simply rooted. She sat beside Ethan, not watching him for cues, not leaning on his steadiness to hold her faith upright. She sang when she wanted, stayed quiet when she needed, and let God meet her where she was. After the service, people lingered, welcoming, curious, kind. Someone invited her to coffee later in the week. Another asked if she'd join a volunteer team once she settled. She realized, with a small start, that she was settling. Outside, Ethan waited patiently, hands in his pockets, watching her with quiet pride. "You're home," he said when she joined him. She nodded, emotion swelling. "I am." That afternoon, they cooked together, laughing over small mishaps, sharing stories neither had rushed to tell before. The house filled with warmth, not just from the oven, but from the sense of shared purpose. As evening fell, they stood in the living room, the air between them shifting again. Familiar, intimate, alive with awareness. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "Can I kiss you?" The question, gentle, reverent, sent a shiver through her. "Yes," she said. The kiss was slow, unhurried, full of restraint that only deepened its meaning. His lips were warm and careful, his hands settling at her waist without pulling her closer than she was ready to go. She rested her palms against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her touch. The world narrowed, then widened again. They parted with shared breath, foreheads resting together, smiles soft and unguarded. "This," she murmured, "is exactly enough." He laughed quietly. "I was hoping you'd say that." They pulled back before the moment tipped into something neither wanted to rush. The discipline no longer felt like loss. It felt like promise. That night, alone once more, she knelt beside the bed, not because she was desperate, not because fear pressed close, but because gratitude demanded posture. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the storm, for the stillness, for not letting me confuse rescue with love, or love with you." Her Bible lay open nearby, the pages worn and familiar. "He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." Micah 6:8. She smiled softly, walking humbly. That was it. That was the way forward. When she rose, she felt lighter, Not unburdened by responsibility, but uncrushed by it. The future remained unwritten, its edges blurred with uncertainty, but fear no longer defined the unknown. Grace did. She turned off the light and slipped beneath the covers, the house quiet around her, Ethan's presence a steady fact rather than a fragile hope. Outside, the mountains stood silent and watchful, not as threats, but as witnesses. And somewhere between the storm that nearly claimed her and the faith that brought her home, she understood at last. Grace had not saved her from the avalanche. It had met her beneath it, and it would walk with her, step by faithful step, into everything that came next.